Welcome everyone to tonight's ASES research webinar. This is our third and final webinar in our research webinar series for this year. We've had a great series so far, and I look forward to having the same great transfer of knowledge tonight. We've got three great surgeons here that will share their experiences, and I think everyone who joins in will find this useful and beneficial. Will also be kind of preserved for us, where people will be able to go back and listen to this at a further time. Tonight's webinar will be on how to build a research team, and with the three surgeons that will be with us. First, we've got Grant Garagous. Grant's at Midwest Orthopedics at Rush in Chicago. Grant runs a large research program there and is part of the shoulder and elbow sports division there. Grant, I'm hoping that he's going to help us understand a little bit of his transition from his practices midstream of going from down at Duke up to Chicago and how that impacted his ability to do research. Next, we have Albert. Albert Lin is at the University of Pittsburgh. He's one of their sports medicine surgeons there, has a predominant focus in shoulder surgery, and he's takes care of many of the University of Pittsburgh teams as well as professional sports in Pittsburgh. So again, we're going to get another opinion of a surgeon who is in a pure academic practice for his whole career at this point in Pittsburgh and get his experience with research. And then finally, we've got Arman Hatzidakis. Arman is in Denver. He's at Western Orthopedics. And Arman is, again, a very experienced shoulder surgeon, but has the experience of being in private practice his entire career, but has still been able to accomplish research. And it'll be great to hear his experiences of how you kind of approach it from that standpoint. So that will be our topics, and we'll have good discussion around it. I'm going to briefly we'll have a short, brief message from Smith and Nephew. We're lucky that they've donated and sponsored for our research webinar series this entire year. And so we'll have a brief message from them, and then we'll start with the discussion. Steve, we've got some audio on the Smith and Nephew.
A bioinductive implant that redefines biologic healing for rotator cuff tendon growth, and the new ATOS shoulder system starring the ATOS Metastem that allows for maximized stability and an elevated surgical experience with an efficient system to help simplify shoulder surgery. We are honored to support the ASDS Foundation, and it is our mission to continue to provide you with the most innovative solutions in the shoulder to help restore the patient's ability to live their life unlimited.
Right. So with that, again, we will circle back at the end and again, thank Smith and Nephew for their participation and sponsorship for what we're doing here. With that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Grant, and Grant will start us off with his experience of how he's been able to build his program at Rush to do research. Grant, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be with these panelists, and thanks to Smith and Nephew for sponsoring. Those pretty sweet looking shoulder arthroplasty I saw there too. Hearts, that looked good. So listen, I don't have any slides. I just have some thoughts that I wrote down, some notes, and I want to share with you. So I think a couple of things. One is I did not build the research program at Rush. There was a research program here long before I got here. But I can tell you the insights that I learned through my, basically academic career, and then in my sort of current job, which is very much a private-emic job. So I think the first thing is, if you're thinking about how to build a research career, the first question is the why, or do you want to do this? Because, your whole, obviously, a lot of high achievers on this call, getting papers, publications, academic success has really been some of the currency to help you proceed to that next level and get that, get into med school and then get into orthopedics and then get into fellowship. And you're reaching a point in your careers where, You don't need to do that. No one's telling you to do that. You don't have to do it. Obviously there are benefits to doing that. But there's also downsides, right? It takes time and resources. So you first need to be, you know, like Shakespeare said, you need to be true to your own self. You need to really look in the mirror and say, hey, is this something I really feel passionate about? And if you don't enjoy staying current and reading all the JSCS issues, you know, if you don't, you know, nerd out with your buddies talking about the latest, you know, shoulder paper or a podium presentation you heard, like, then maybe this isn't your passion, and that is totally okay. So again, I want to just get, you know, have people kind of just really get a thought of, is this something you want to do? Now, if you want to do it, that's great. It's been incredibly rewarding for me, and I love it. I've been in different models where some they kind of compensate for research productivity and some they don't. And it didn't, I looked back, it didn't change my productivity at all. Like I was just doing it whether they told me to do it or not. It was just something I enjoyed doing. And I think if it's in your DNA, then it's in your DNA. So I think it takes resources. So my partners at Rush are extremely high volume. I'm talking like over 1,000 cases a year, over 100 patients in their clinic sessions. I mean, incredibly high volume. I mean, like I'm not doing that level of volume, but I'm fairly high volume myself. And what I see and what really you don't realize is they are taking time out of that incredibly busy schedule, you know, being team docs for different teams, doing all these cases, et cetera, to have weekly research meetings, sit down research meetings, you know, some people on Zoom, some people in a room with research coordinators every single week. And you talk about resources. I mean, that time, that's the most valuable commodity. So one thing is we have weekly research meetings. They alternate knee, shoulder, basic science, and clinical. So there's one clinical knee, one basic science knee, one clinical shoulder, one basic science shoulder throughout the month. So every Monday, it's research at 5 p.m. research meeting period. So that's number one. You have to set aside time. I think we all know research. You can get really excited after you go to the annual meeting and want to write a bunch of papers, but it takes like a sustained effort over a long period of time to really build something. That's number one. Number two is the resources. Like it takes funding. So we spend a lot of time with philanthropy and writing and doing grant writing and just really pounding the pavement to try to get some of the money to fund some of these things, especially if you want to do basic science. And I'm sure Albert will talk about the stuff he does with motion analysis. Like that is not cheap to have those labs and that expertise on standby. I think you're going to need help. So it depends on who's around, right? If you're in a big program with fellows and residents that are just adept and excited about shoulder and want to work with you, that's a great thing. And it can be a virtuous cycle, right? Where if you get them working with you and then you're productive, then the next group will say, oh, I see how much they got done. I want to work with you. But sometimes it's hard to get it going. You know, if you're looking to hire somebody, often it can be a, you know, an undergrad wanting to get into med school and they really want to get some publications. They're real go-getters and they can be great. And they are great. But you got to really understand like what they're going to be able to provide. Their sophisticated medical writing is probably not going to be their strong suit because they just don't know that information. But in terms of calling patients, working on IRB stuff, et cetera, that can be really, really helpful. Speaking of collaborators, I think PhD collaborators, from what I know about PhDs, their biggest pet peeve is these clinicians that come in and say, hey, I got this idea, go do this for me in the lab. They hate that. And of course they hate that. And that happens to them all the time. And you have to just understand that that is their life. Is some clinician comes in, thinks he's got the greatest research idea, dumps it in their lap and then leaves. So you really need to build a relationship there. Show them that you have skin in the game. You know, if you have research funds, hey, I got these funds, let's use them, let's do it. I'm not just bringing ideas, I'm bringing money to the table. And then also your time. Again, regular meetings. We're going to meet. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to explain my concepts to you. You're going to help me understand what you do in your lab. You have to build that relationship because basic science takes a while to develop and you can't skip those steps. It's super, super important. I think the last thing is Bob wanted me to talk about, you know, I was in a very kind of purely academic model and then I'm in a private model. I would say, from a research perspective, it's not as different as you would think. And Hots can talk about this, but because he's in kind of a unique situation. But a lot of the private practice groups that are very large, and Hans can talk about his group, but the very large ones, from research perspective, they're extremely large. They have a lot of high volume people. They have like IRB relationships. They have trainees. I mean, they function very much like an academic center. I think no matter what kind of group you're in, the biggest headache in research by far is going to be just the time spent dealing with attorneys, data use agreements, material transfer agreements, IRB protocols and stuff. So I think it's important to develop those relationships early because they're going to be delays, and it's nice to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, this has been on your desk for 3 months. Like, can we work this? And that's hard at first because a lot of these things are submitted through a portal and you got to get to know them. So those are kind of my pearls for me. I would say, again, just to summarize, you got to know yourself. Like, is this something you're really passionate about? Is this something you want to do? Because it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of resources. And then again, to do it, you have to raise some money or get some funding from your chair or win some grants or whatever. And you have to be willing to devote the time. And I don't mean like, I'm going to take a week and do this. I mean, literally, every week, a couple times a month, week in, week out, you got to do it. And then you're going to need help. Hopefully you're at a program where there's trainees that are willing to dive in. Obviously, if you're bringing your effort to the table and your ideas, I mean, they're hungry for that, and they really will take that and run with it. And then the last thing is, again, the PhD and the basic science stuff. You got to develop those relationships. Those things take time. It's like a plant. You got to nurture it, but they can be incredibly fruitful. And again, I'll let Albert talk more about that because he's done some really cool basic science stuff. So those are my thoughts. Just to kick it off, I guess I'll kick it back to Bob Tashjian.
That was great. Thanks, Grant. I think all those are, I think you highlighted many kind of themes that are probably consistent with what everyone experiences here, is that, time is the commodity. You really have to have a passion to do this because you can pretty much do anything else and it will pay you more money than actually doing this. And this is not the whole reason to do this is because you want to do this, because you find it, interesting, not because you think that something bigger is going to be happening because of this. So I think the end result of your research should be the reason why you're doing what you're doing. It should not be as a tool to be able to speak on a podium or to get industry to be able to start, having you as a consultant, or to have your, get good graces in your department. All those things may occur as a result of doing research, but that's not the reason to do it, because is that you just want the end product of what the result of the study is, because none of those things also might happen. But you will at least have an answer to the question that you're actually trying to investigate.
Bob, if I can sorry, go ahead.
No. So I think you make very good points with regards to the need, or the why is, it's interesting when we were, I'll kick back to you on this, but the reason why I think it's interesting is that different people do different things. And we, meaning me, I structured our division, i.e. the shoulder division, around a model of, and I spoke to Armand a little bit about this, and he knows this, is how do you create not necessarily a research team that's functional, but how do you create a clinical team that's functional? And I think a lot of times clinical teams break down because they don't have a well-defined purpose with regards to how to unite them. There should be a mission and a vision, there should be goals, and there should be an approach to achieve those goals over a short and long-term period of time, in my opinion, of a clinical division. And that's how a clinical division goes from a really good clinical division to a clinical division that is just kicking at all cylinders. And so I went through this process myself, and I said, how do we kind of define our why for my team, and or I should say our team at Utah, and it's research. And so we created the concept of research as a focus of how to actually build the team. And that includes hiring Peter, it includes hiring Chris, and how to integrate all three of those people with a key focus around us as being actually a strong interest in research. And so not only does it allow you can build a research team, but you can build a clinical team around this concept of research. And I would strongly suggest that if you do create a research team, that you use the same process, because you can investigate everything. Do you know what I mean? And you need to have some element of a focus of how you want to approach your research. If you do it systematically, the likelihood for you to be very successful is going to be much higher than if you're just kind of all over the place and grabbing things. Your likelihood of success is going to be much lower. Go ahead, Grant.
Well, first of all, that was so much more profound than what I was going to say, but absolutely. I was just going to comment on your earlier comment about the kind of the protected time and research time. And this is something that took me a while to learn, is that it's a little bit of a myth. Like the idea that somehow someone is going to like make you whole for the clinical time you're missing to do research, it just doesn't work that way. Like the research brings in, obviously there's some positive effects to the university and maybe you get some grants and stuff, but in terms of what you could bring into your partnership or your group or your hospital, being an orthopedic surgeon, like on an hourly rate, you're going to bring in more to them, certainly as a clinician, period, no matter how successful of research you are. So, I mean, you might get your chairman or to kind of, help defray some of that cost and ease some of that burden. But just the idea that you're going to somehow have a kind of, a day a week of research and you're going to get paid the same on that day as you would the 4 days. That's just not a thing that exists. So just go ahead and disabuse yourself of that notion. And if you're okay with that, if you're like, listen, that's all right. Like I want to be a clinician and a scientist, then that's fine. But just, you need to understand that, because that took me a while to learn personally.
Agreed. Yeah. The thing that I wanted to ask you about a little bit that was unique to Rush was that the program with regards to students that you have there, I know this a little bit through Peter, is that that there's a large number of undergrads, or I should say, undergrads that would like to get into medical school. If I understand the kind of typical age, I guess, or level of student that works on the team at Rush, it's not necessarily a lot of people that have finished medical school that are trying to get into residency. There are some, but there's a lot of people that are finished undergrad work that are trying to then get into medical school. And how do you, that it's a double-edged sword with regards to running a program like that. And partly it's because, or at least I feel compelled, that if you're bringing students on, that you need to be mentoring them. So it's not just having them be a workhorse where they're just going to plug away and grind it out. That your goal is not to have them learn research, but it's also to mentor them through the process of their education. And how does that work for your team, the surgeons at Rush? And how do you also deal with the idea or the problem that sometimes is that if you see a student that you don't think has it, do you know what I mean? Like you can't go to bat for this guy or gal, that do you determine that before you even offer them a job? Or how, you know what I mean? Because they're investing time and energy, and then it's then Grant Garagus's name that is going to go and be the guy that's going to stand up for him or her to go to the next step. And if you don't necessarily feel comfortable with that, do you mentor them through the process? Do you say, you need to think about something else? What's your strategy in that?
Yeah. So just briefly, yes, we have a bunch of students that come in. I think the keys to that are, we have sort of full-time people that are there year after year that are part of our department, because you need to have some institutional memory. You need to have very clear, like we have like a handoff meeting. So there's overlap where like everybody comes in, we get in a room, we go over every single study, we go exactly where it is, basically the same as our weekly meeting, but it's like all hands on deck. We have, you know, a lot of kind of project trackers and spreadsheets and everything, because, you know, with that scenario, you have to have a lot of handoffs. And so you need some kind of institutional memory and then also some project tracking. As far as what you mentioned, absolutely. You need to realize that most of these people are either trying to get into residency, trying to get in med school. So that's their priority. So first of all, you need to be understanding of that. You know, they're going to want to interview for positions. They're going to want to, you know, apply, take MCATs, and you have to get it. Like that's their main goal, and totally understand that. We try to be really choosy about who we selected. Last year, our research assistant was awesome. I'm trying to get him to work in Albert's lab because he's now matriculated as a med student at UPMC, and I'm really happy for him. That was a huge goal, and you guys are really lucky to have him. So I have had some that I had one that wasn't the greatest, and we tried to mentor him and kind of did all that stuff, and you know, and it got to a successful conclusion. But you know, it's never easy. I think you're going to spend a year with somebody, and as you said at the end of it, you're pretty much going to be writing them a letter rec. So you better make sure it's somebody that you're already really excited about.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Why don't we go to Albert? Albert, I don't know if you have slides, a couple of them. You do.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple of slides here. So yeah, Bob, thanks for having me. And it's always
Sure.
fun to be on, you know, the panel with these guys. They're just the best in the business here. So, you know, Bob asked me to talk a little bit about sort of the being in an academic institution in a place that, you know, had sort of a very historic kind of research throughput and what that's like. But I think you'll see that there's really a lot of common themes here. And so let me just share my screen here. So, you know, in order to sort of avoid sort of flight of ideas, I basically was like, okay, let me just jot down some things that people have asked me over the years, sort of what we can do to kind of make things successful. And so basically I thought about like, you know, 5 tips, and they go in the following, and they're not in any particular order. And so, you know, some of this Grant has alluded to for sure. Find collaborators, really, no one ever really does it alone. I think a multi-tier mentorship model and understanding how to delegate is really important. And then, you know, show me the money. These things require money, right? So, or funding. Like Grant said, you got to be a real mentor. And so this devotes time, and you know, if you have a clinical busy practice, this is like something that you do on top of it, almost as sort of, you know, I do this because I really like doing it. So you have to almost lead by example, and you have to understand that, you know, see a lot of your mentors, you know, some of the younger guys on the webinar right now, you see them have these like huge sort of, you know, big machinery, and it's really something that really didn't develop just overnight. It really takes a lot of kind of time. And so, you know, one of the things is, you know, find a collaborator. So you really, I think, have to understand where your resources are, and you have to collaborate with really like-minded individuals. And so for me, from sort of a surgical perspective, I was fortunate to be hired by Freddie Fu, who, you know, had been doing it for years. And so we're able to kind of see sort of all the fellows he was kind of working with and how he's able to mentor them. That in of itself was like just a tremendous model to even just kind of see, but even just kind of, you know, how did Freddie get from, you know, what I saw him as monolith, like, you know, individual, how did he, you know, he had to start from somewhere. And so, you know, I think when you start practice in the beginning, you know, and you want to get involved, you're not going to have your own patients. And so some of the easiest ways is to find other colleagues who are interested in doing what you do. And you say, hey, would you mind if I looked up your patients and we could collaborate together? That's often like a very, you know, easy way to kind of get started before you're able to collect, you know, your own data and be in practice for a while. You can always start with very simple things like case reports on your own. And, you know, we at Pitt have, you know, PhD collaborators. We have, you know, our basic scientists. And we started, you know, even a couple years ago saying, hey, we should meet as just like a shoulder group. Just like Grant was saying, you know, we would do it once a month because it's, you know, herding a bunch of orthopedic surgeons together is like herding cats, right? And so we would try to find at least once a month and talk about research projects and potential collaboration ideas. And then, you know, it basically became formalized into what we now call the Pittsburgh Shoulder Institute, which is a group of us who we still meet once a month. We collaborate on projects. We collaborate on sort of multi sort of investigator projects, and they include our PhD colleagues. And it sort of, it lasts. If you do that regularly, those collaborations last. It's funny, Grant was saying about understand where your lab resources are, your basic scientists. You know, they need you for your clinical expertise, but you really need them for their brain. And it is not one of those things. It's a two-way street. They don't understand sort of some of the clinical implications of what we're studying, and you don't really understand sort of the nitty-gritty engineering that's required to do some of these complex studies. And so, at Pitt, yes, we have these labs. There are orthopedic robotics labs, our biodynamics lab, we have cell biology. Our PT department historically has been excellent with Jay Irgang, now Adam Popchak, and a bunch of other people who are really leading the charge there. They have so much expertise that it's almost, if you are in a place where you can collaborate, it's almost a waste to not do it. And so, but it requires time, and it requires, it's sort of it definitely requires a two-way street. A multi-tier mentorship model. So it's funny, a year ago, sorry, a fellow of mine said, how did you get these research fellows that work with you? And I had to kind of really think about sort of how to answer that, because in the beginning, you need somebody to help you, right? There's no way as a, practicing orthopedic surgeon, you can do the IRBs, you can do the chart reviews, you just can't do it. And so in the very beginning, I had a postgraduate student who actually happened to be the cousin of my PA at the time, who was sort of in between, wanted to take a gap year before medical school. And she said, can I work with you? And I was actually kind of terrified, because I wasn't really sure sort of how to really mentor this. And in the beginning, it was like a very one-on-one interaction, right? So she had to, I had to kind of go over sort of how to, do an Excel spreadsheet, and, what this what shoulder instability was, and explain some of the anatomy. And what you quickly realize is that with each interaction of, let's say, a undergrad student or a medical student who wants to do research with you, you can't have one-on-one interactions with them all the time. It is because the gap in knowledge is so great that to take the time to be able to reinvent that every single time someone's working with you will quickly turn into burnout. And so for me, I quickly realized the easiest way to kind of mentor her was to say, okay, I'm going to link you with one of my residents. And the resident had enough knowledge to be able to kind of go over some of the specifics. And then sort of as a team, we'd be able to say, okay, she could do a lot of the chart reviews. The resident would be able to do some of the more sort of things that require medical knowledge, and maybe even bring a fellow into it, so you can have like, different tiers of knowledge. And so to me, when I started to think about it, surgical hierarchies, we know exist for a reason, right? The intern doesn't just kind of talk straight to the attending, because if that were the case, that would be really, really inefficient. So your research team, I think, eventually should be like no different. You should have multi-tiers with varying expertise and experience. And so our current research team now looks like a postgrad student, some med students, resident fellows. We have some foreign fellows and engineers at the labs. And each one of them have a very different role. So I think you really need to understand how to delegate. And what this does is it ensures that each level can give and get mentorship from each varying level. Everyone can then become very productive because everyone helps in everyone's projects. And pretty soon that one person who came to you for, to get 1 or 2 papers now has 10 papers, because everyone's been working together on a project. And what this also does is it ensures that you, as the leader of that team, you're overseeing really the big picture and making the most important decisions about sort of the aims, the hypothesis, where the study is going. So I really think for us, a multi-tier sort of mentorship model has really kind of fed sort of the machine, and been able to give us the ability to become very, very productive. The third thing, obviously, all this research and stuff, it costs money, right? Even doing simple clinical research does cost money if you need somebody to kind of keep track of PROs and sort of follow-ups. But the basic lab studies, also, they require a lot more money. So for me, what was really helpful, and most institutions are like this, you can often get like small startup money. And when I started, Dr. Fu actually gave me 40,000 of startup money, which I kind of then kind of chatted with our PhD basic scientists in our robotics and our motion capture lab, and I basically split it 20K, 20K, and we basically just did some small pilot studies. One was a cadaveric study, one was a kind of a small in vivo study for superior capsular reconstruction. And then just by having seed money to do those small projects, we then were able to kind of flip those preliminary results and start applying to grants. We were able to flip them into NIH grants. And then from those grants, we're hoping to flip those into R01s. And so typically you need something small to start with. And sometimes the department can give you that. Sometimes you can get that through, the organizations. And it can be frustrating, as a new investigator. I remember the most frustrating thing was applying to grants and then them telling me I didn't have enough experience. And I'm like, well, I'm actually applying to a new investigators grant. So that's, isn't that the point of, this grant? But I think in the beginning, like grants, I got a lot of grants rejected, and that's sort of the norm. And we just kept, kind of pushing forward. In addition, if you're in an academic place, understand what your partnership is with the medical school. So over the last 4 or 5 years, I've had between third and fourth year medical student interested in a research track called our Clinical Sciences Training Program, CSTP, and they fund basically that medical student. So what's nice is that I've been able to sort of have them on my team, mentor them, but they're actually fully funded by the medical school. That's huge because it's not funding that I had to continually track either through our NIH grants or get them through my department. And so once you are able to show sort of a critical mass of productivity, you can then start seeing if you can negotiate that into your contract regarding, hey, can I get 20K or 30K per year to hire a medical student to be on board with us. I think this is sort of what Grant was really talking about with, kind of the time spent. You have to be a real mentor. So, in the beginning, having somebody on a research team may feel very transactional. They need you for your research, sponsorship, letter of recommendation. You need them to have someone on the ground level to be able to kind of, help kind of with the productivity. And that sort of thing kind of feeds the machine. But really, I think if you're a real mentor, it will actually perpetuate the machine. The experiences, those things, they tend to, give positive feedback and have people sort of want to work on the team. You have to hold regular meetings. So it's sort of really, really, really critical. And when people give you, projects that hey, can you look at this? Can you look at this manuscript? I think it's also really important that you provide really timely feedback. Grant talks about the once a week meetings. For us, I hold basically, there's 3 separate meetings that I'm in, which essentially amounts to 1 meeting a week. And so there's I meet with our basic science labs. I work with my personal research team, and then we work through the Pittsburgh Shoulder Institute, which is our sort of more collaborative team. And so it's, that's the only way things get done is sort of people, you're held accountable. You meet with them frequently, and it takes a lot of time and dedication. There's really no 2 ways about it. I think people will find your passion, enthusiasm. If they see it, it's infectious. If you respond to them timely, they know you're serious about it. In an academic place, or sort of when people are helping you, I really think it's important to give credit where credit is due. I know a lot of colleagues that, they have research fellows, and then suddenly they do the work and then they put themselves as first author. I have never done that. I've given first authorship to postgraduate students, if that's the work that they did. And what it does is it leads to a really good positive feedback loop. And so I think there's no better way to squash enthusiasm than to have somebody do a lot of work and then for you to take credit for it. I think it's also really important that you assign projects that can be accomplished in an appropriate time frame. So when I think about it, I said, well, let's say we have our sports fellows. I think about projects that they can do reasonably in a year. That includes a lot of retrospective studies, things that they can reasonably accomplish. There's nothing that I think is worse than a fellow coming in and you telling them, well, we're going to apply for this grant, this NIH R01 grant. I mean, that's something they're never going to see in like until 3 to 4 years. And so it's unfair, I think, to give something like that to somebody who's only going to be with you for a year. Conversely, you have like a junior resident or somebody who knows is going to be around for a while. Yeah, I think it's okay to say, hey, do you want to, you want to work on a project where we prospective collected data over 2 years or so. And I think, yeah, I think, when research transcends sort of that transactional level, that's when you can really reach meaningful stuff. And then the last thing, I think just summing it up, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are any, big research, infrastructure. I think few people, if they were given a large research infrastructure when they start, would even know really what to do with it. Because I think it's very hard to just say, okay, well, this is how I'm going to be able to delegate this. You almost have to build it over time so you understand sort of what works for you. I think start with small projects. You can recruit a small team, medical student, residents, again, sort of a multi-tier level. I think, start with collecting PROs like right away. And if you haven't been doing it, just start it. I also think if we're going to do a lot of clinical retrospective study, dictate good notes so that when you look back at it, you have something to report on. And again, small sources of funding can then be flipped into bigger resources. And then again, once you reach a critical mass of funding, the productivity and reputation, I think opportunities and working and building your team will usually just happen organically. So that's it for me.
Lot of information. Great, great talk. Thank you, Albert. This is like, what I was hoping for. And so you knocked it out of the park. Great job. I have some comments. I don't know if anyone else, Peter, Grant, Armand, if you guys want to start it off, I'm happy to, but why don't I think one of the things that I think both you and Grant make a good point of is this kind of concept of a meeting. And one thing that I think is the people that are on the webinar, you have to know how to run a good meeting. And so this is not something that is taught to us and in medical school. Oftentimes it's not taught in residency. And oftentimes you're going to have actually bad examples of how to run a meeting that are kind of littered throughout your entire training. And so I think one of the best ways in my mind to be able to have a productive research team is to be able to actually understand how to run a meeting. And it's not, you think it's kind of just intuitive, but it really isn't. And you as the leader of the research team need to be the person that is in charge. You need to set an agenda. You need to have an agenda given at a certain timetable before so people can respond to that. You need to keep people on time. You need to set out a note taker in the meeting so that they can actually then be able to allow kind of what goes on in the meeting to be recorded. You need to have some set of guidelines or rules within your meeting as to how to, there's this concept of like psychological safety, which is basically giving space for people to be able to express themselves without feeling like they are going to be chastised or thought of as inferior. And like Albert talked about, this hierarchy that's created, there's a resident or a med student or whoever the person, the team member that probably has a really good idea. And you need to be able to set the tone that it's okay for those people to be able to, in the environment of 15 or 20 people, be able to express what they feel in a way that isn't going to be looked at as stupid or not beneficial. And at the same time, you need to be able to create the space to listen to them, meaning that it's not just a lot, saying that the environment is right, but you actually have to create space and actively listen to what they're actually saying. So I think those are all things that are important. And then obviously following up and being the person that's going to kind of make sure that the homework is done and move the project forward. And, those kind of concepts a lot of times get missed. And if you aren't running a meeting correctly, then I think you're not going to be as productive. So that was just one thought that I had about kind of what Albert was bringing in. The other was, if you have a large grant, my recommendation is you actually create a separate meeting just for the grant. that I think the best way to do that is if you have a very large project that's say an R01, then you have your whole team meet just to discuss the R01 and you don't complicate with all other projects that you're doing. And that actually, you have to create time and space in your schedule to do that because you're never going to be able to actually do that in your regular research meeting that has 25 other projects that are going on. And oh, by the way, we've got an R21 and this is what we need to be able to do. And I've got, 5 other specialties that are involved in this to be able to give the space that is needed to be able to move it forward. You need more time than that. And then the last thought that I had on kind of teams and how to work on teams, meaning like a meeting, is that the meeting needs to extend beyond the meeting. That a lot of what is done, like from I think a intellectual standpoint of idea generation, working through problems is all the time between the meetings, and that requires communication. And so, I see it with me and Peter a lot that we have just like you guys, we have kind of biweekly meetings for basic science, and then on the opposite week we have clinical work, and so we kind of do this back and forth. But I mean, Peter and I are literally texting daily about projects that have nothing to do with clinical work. And it's that kind of process that where the idea generation actually occurs. And really the meeting is then to kind of see what the rest of the group wants to do. How can we kind of translate this forward to being able to move this into a more, getting the wheel to move forward. But you need on your team, I think, communication almost daily between the members of your team to be able to really make aggressive progress. Otherwise, if you're just going every once a week to be able to actually talk to the team members, it's going to take forever to do your work.
Yeah, Bob,
just-
I think that constant communication is like really, really key. Part of it, I had alluded to sort of as the PI, you don't want to be, you don't want to give somebody feedback on their manuscript like 2 months later. That's a good way to make sort of motivation and everything die. And I think, everyone has a different way of doing it. For us, I think what works well is the 2 people who work really closely with me are, I have a post-grad student and a medical student from Pitt, and they're sort of my direct conduit where I'm kind of communicating with them all the time about, hey, what's the project? What's the status of this? How's this going? They're able to kind of help me communicate with some of the other people on our sort of our expansive team. And so I find that that comment that you made is that what the progress is in between the meetings. It's absolutely true. Like I know pretty much by the time we have that meeting and we're running through the list of projects, I almost have a really good sense already of sort of where things are. And we're trying to, so the meetings are spent either fine tuning that or we're discussing sort of more sort of innovative sort of thoughts. But I wholeheartedly agree, because if you're not doing anything and then you're just saving everything for that meeting, it's going to be a completely non-productive meeting.
Other thoughts?
Well, I think
Frank?
just one topic you're both mentioning is momentum. And one thing I see the PIs being or the head of the organization is you're a momentum generator, and you continue the momentum on projects. And so I think you both bring up really great points, because if you don't continue that momentum going, projects die and they become inefficient, as you said, Bob.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I see, a research team as a business. I mean, it's basically you're creating a small business, and you need to be able to actually run that business just like the guy who's down the street selling bagels or whatever. And if you use the same mentality of that, of how do you build that from a team standpoint, and like you understand what your product is and how to actually be efficient with the people that you're working with, you're going to be productive. But if you just kind of a little bit take this as, oh, I'm a surgeon and this is just kind of, I have an interest in what we're doing, and that's okay, I think. But my recommendation is, if that's kind of what you want to do, I would join someone else's team, as opposed to you being the person. There's a lot of people that are around that say, I want, it would be great if I could get someone to help me out collaborating with some cases that you do, because they have their own research team. That's completely fine. But I think it's actually a great way to become involved with what we do. But if you want to actually create your own research team, then the energy that's required to do that it's like building a business, and you have to, and otherwise you're going to be frustrated. There's going to be a lot of inefficiency. There's going to be a lot of wasted time and frustration. And it's probably going to, I think, turn you off of research. And it's not because that what you're trying to do is not interesting or the science isn't probably interesting. It's just that you haven't created the right structure to be able to make it happen. Great. Armand, why don't you give us a couple thoughts? Or
Sure.
Peter, have a comment with that?
I can ask after.
Okay, no problem.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I just to bring it home, I'm not going to say anything that's really new. This has been a fantastic webinar, and I've learned a lot, and I'm really humbled to be included. Thanks, Bob, to be with such great research institutes such as yours, Alberts and Grants. It's really humbling, and you guys have just done a fantastic job. So I'll finish up just by bringing up that a sense of humor is required to maintain good teams. And so I let my research coordinator, Libby, I said, put a few pictures on a slide or two idea I have. And she said, well, let me get this one. And I think it's appropriate actually, because you can do private practice and just have your cocktail on a whatever night you want. And you don't have to worry about research. And I joke with other docs too, and like Albert and Grant and Bob, we are some of the only professionals that ask for another almost full-time job that you're almost not reimbursed for. So you really have to be passionate to do this, to start it. So I'll just share a few of the things that have helped me. Armand Hatzidakis, I'm in Denver, Colorado. Why develop a research program in private practice? And I think some of you hopefully watching this have an interest. You don't know, should I do it? Well, there are a lot of great reasons to do it. It's to continue your passion, like Grant said. You've been passionate about doing research, learning, contributing, really contributing, not just doing papers for paper's sakes, but contributing, and continue that. And the great thing about that in private practice is you can really optimize the clinical follow-up of your patients. You're not going to do bench studies like Albert's doing at Pitt, but you can optimize your clinical follow-up, and that's really important. They're your best learning tools in practice. And you can even change your practice patterns based on findings. And I have done that several times during my career, or changed things based on what I'm seeing through my research. You can participate in exciting new FDA IDE studies to develop new technology. You can create and publish manuscripts, which just has an intrinsic satisfaction to come up with an idea, a project, and then actually complete it and get it published and contribute. It's really a great opportunity to collaborate with some of your favorite colleagues, just like the gentlemen on this call are some of my favorite people, and you can collaborate with them on meaningful work. It can help people like me start a fellowship. Didn't have a fellowship to start, but you need research to make that fellowships the best experience possible. You need a solid research program to do that. And finally, really is one of the final keys to feel complete in your profession. And I know Grant likes movie quotes, so I put this in for Grant from Jerry Maguire. But also it's been brought up by all the speakers today. You got to be serious about it, because it also is in another movie. Research can be the Joker and can really, put a wrench in the works here if you don't do it right. So it's key to do it right. So to me, the keys to success, which means starting, then maintain and grow your research program at your own particular practice, is really determine your topic. For me, shoulder arthroplasty was a big interest, so that was my topic. Then figure out funding. And there are less complicated ways of finding funding. You can go to industry or hospital systems and actually get some reimbursement for data points. Data is worth something. You're not getting inured or being supported inappropriately to actually participate with industry and hospital systems to provide research on clinical outcomes. And so that's helped me finance my research program. You can get grants, and the other speakers on the program are more experts than I am on that. And some self-funding to start. If you're passionate, put your money where your mouth is and put a little bit of funding to start it up, because you have to start somewhere, and sometimes that's the way you have to do it. And then, as the other talks have mentioned, determine your own practice challenges. I was in a smaller private practice where I just couldn't impact my partners negatively financially to start a research program. That's easy, but you may be in a bigger program that has more obstacles or has help with that. And I just wanted to bring up a few credits. My fellowship director, Tom Norris, connected me with a company called Tournier way back when. It's now Stryker. And this is Jim Hook, who said, okay, I think research is worth it. I'm going to support your program, Armand. So how can we do that? And we figured out a way to do that in a compliant fashion. So the real key is, if you have the passion, start early. Start as soon as you start your practice. Bob had the good idea of joining someone else's projects. That's a great way to start, to get your feet wet. And try to enroll patients in registries. I started practice in 2003. That's when we had our first patient enrolled. I think that's my picture from one of my ID badges from then. And then I've been in practice for 20 years. And in 2008, I had a first full-time research coordinator hired. And then you have to have partners in the process. Ben Sears has been a fantastic partner in this process to make good quality research and find people who are passionate like you to work with you. It's really hard to do this as a silo. You need good partners. And that can develop into something very rewarding. And now we're at a process where we have 2 full-time research staff, and we have a fellowship in our 3rd year. So that's been really rewarding. The key is really to hire employees whose focus is research as soon as financially possible. You really need employees or mentees, as Albert mentioned, who really want to focus on it. And it's not just a side gig, it's a real focus. And so an MA or pre-med students are great. But they won't be your research coordinator forever. Your goal is to get them to bigger and better things. You need to have people who may want to be permanent employees, who really like to do this. They have skills that are required at a variety of necessary research tasks, organizing, working with our IRBs, and contributing to projects. PhD is not required in a smaller private practice setting. You can find highly educated individuals who are interested in career transitions. Libby Mauder, my research coordinator at this point, was a physical therapist and then ended up working in the hospital and was looking for something different to do. We got to know each other over time, and she's a good person and solid with what she does. And that's what you really need to find: people who can work with you, people who you can joke with, and people who can get the job done, and people who really want to dig ditches with you. And because sometimes it does feel like that when you're trying to do good quality research. There's a regulatory aspect. You need people to do that. You don't have time in a private practice to do that, as Grant alluded to. You need people to take care of the details in this, and probably most of you on this call aren't interested in that aspect, and so really need to find people to do that. You can find people in your office that can call, and find the nicest person in your office that is great with people on the telephone. This is Alma on the left. We pay her a little bit extra to call patients to get them in. And as a result, we have a follow-up rate that's pretty good. Our 2-year follow-up rate on our total shoulders is about 70 to 80%, and 5 years, 50% for 5-year follow-up. And you need good people to call them and really care to get them in, who people like to talk to. They got to keep them on the phone and get them to come in. And then doing the research data collection, who are trainable to get ranges of motion the right way, to follow your clinical outcomes in a very independent, honest, and objective fashion is key. So having those right people to do that, those measurements, it can't be you just saying, well, okay, I saw someone at the restaurant and they had 140 degrees of elevation. You actually want to get the measurements, and that's key, to be exact. It takes a lot to really manage these studies, especially if you're doing IDE studies, if you're doing multi-center collaborative studies. Look at the picture on the left. You have file folders, and on Grant will recognize this little stick right here. Congratulations, Grant, who has worked several years on organizing a paper on PT after reverse arthroplasty. Just won the NEAR, or has won an award, I think. I don't know if I can say that, but he has worked hard on that, and that's the stick for health-directed physical therapy. And you have to keep track of that and teach people how to do that, and have a staff to do that. That's that white piece of PVC piping. And then, not to mention, keep track of all of the different regulatory binders, et cetera. So you need good people to do that. So contract and budget negotiation is key to keep your research going, and you need people to help you manage that, good attorneys, and you can leverage your colleagues to work with corporations on getting good budgets approved for your procedures or for your studies. You can't just show them a budget and say, well, we need $1 million, which and then maybe hope that they'll give you 200,000. It has to be really discreet, exact, and precise on what you're actually providing for the financier and what you're providing and what you're getting for that. And it has to translate to something you can pay for with good people that you're paying for in the office. The staff can provide data analysis, visualization, charts, and graphs to help you understand the data. That's key first, and then help other people understand the data. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And so you need people that actually are interested in doing that and organizing it for you. Finally, writing is helpful if you don't have a flotilla of residents or fellows that can help, or hurt sometimes in some cases because you have to correct what they do. Then you have to train your staff on writing a bit the way you do, or being really meticulous to detail in your personality. And you have to spend time to really be a good mentor for your staff, whether they're a student or a physical therapist or a permanent research hire, and that can still result in fruitful outcomes in getting your work finalized and published, which is our goal. And then this is the final joke that my research staff put in. I do have them go take clinical pictures for talks and things. And they said, okay, well, we just have to show exactly how many pictures you have in this huge database, which you rarely use, but you keep sending them over, and you need staff to do that so that you can actually see your results and show them and follow your results over time. And this is like 190 gigabytes of pictures. So once again, the main thing I wanted to get through with this part, Bob, and thanks for inviting me again, is that it's really finding the right people, the right staff, and the right team. And I think that Albert, you and Grant have brought up ways to do that. It's good people are the key in organizing and having people be passionate and having a good sense of humor throughout, so that you can get through the good times and tough times to get good things done. So thanks again, Bob. That's all I got.
That was great. That was awesome. I think that it really kind of speaks to that you can do this in private practice. You do have to, again, there's almost even a further passion, because like what you said, that the first picture is reality, that many of your partners are just doing that, which is okay. And there it is really sometimes very thankless. We're a lot of times lucky, Grant, me, Albert, that we're somewhat motivated around an academic environment because many of our partners are doing exactly what we're doing. So it's not like trying to keep up with the Joneses, but there's an element of that there's this energy around you that then kind of you will do the same through osmosis, where it's not necessarily the case when you're in private practice. So I will ask Peter to kind of jump in about the question that they have, but the one thing that I wanted to know from your standpoint is, Armand, is that how have you can't, I think the difference between doing research and what in a academic setting versus private practice is scope. That's what I think is the main differentiator, is that it's easier for me and Grant and definitely Albert to have 4 or 5 different buckets where you can be kind of working in each of these different silos to be able to actually do work. Whereas I think in private practice, it becomes much more challenging to do that. You don't have a geneticist at your door. You don't have 3 bioengineers that are already have R01s that they're sitting on something else. You might not necessarily have kind of a global, like, chairman of research or vice chairman of research or research director for your entire department. Whereas a lot of, I don't know how it works at Pitt, but I'm sure that there is a hierarchy with regards to leadership within the department. You probably don't have that. So how did you, how do you see yourself or other people that are on the line being able to make a decision of scope? Like that, I think that is a really important decision that you have to make early, especially if you're in private practice.
Well, I think that's a great point, Bob. I think you have to realize your own personal situation and realize your scope that you can actually execute on. I think it goes to what Albert said about not giving someone with a year tenure a 5-year project. So the same applies to yourself. If I said, Armand, you have to do a genetic testing on a murine rotator cuff model, that's setting myself up for failure. But that's why I had my first census determine the topic, and then it has to be realistic. So for me, it was more, I want to focus on the clinical follow-up of my patients and how they do, and get support for that rather than say, well, just come back in a year and we'll see how it's doing, or 5 years. I wanted to build an infrastructure so that we're actually getting those people in so they can learn what implants are doing at 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. And that was something that I felt that I could do. And we have this challenge throughout, because as soon as you learn about one implant, you've switched to something else. So that for everybody on this call that has an interest in arthroplasty or sports or whatever it is, there's some topic that you can realistically decide you want to study, but then that has to have some kind of interest elsewhere so that you can get it funded. So industry, et cetera. So I think really setting a realistic goal for yourself in the beginning, knowing what your limitations are, getting the right people on board, getting some support either from your hospital, your institution, your practice, or industry, and then organically building, and then having patience. I think what Albert said was really germane. I think that if I had a full research institute to come into when I started practice, I wouldn't have known what to do with it, or I might not have been as passionate as I am starting it fresh. So hopefully over time, when you do that, you can continue the process in your practice with other interested individuals. But I'd say being realistic and then figuring out a attainable goal for yourself that lets yourself also have other parts of your life, like family, et cetera, which are also very important. I think that's the key, being realistic.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Peter?
Oh, thank you very much. Great talks. I have one question. How do you assure longevity of a team, especially when majority of stakeholders are temporary, and there might be a year when you get really not very driven individuals? Are there particular things you are looking, identifying individual team members, or are there any other tricks how to assure your business survives?
Grant? I'll ask you, I have some thoughts on that, but it'll be good to hear because there's obviously a lot of throughput in your environment with regards to, staff, especially with how the research model is set up there. What's been strategy for you to be able to make sure that not necessarily the the individual survives, but the organism survives, i.e. your team that you've created?
Yeah, so you can have learners come for a short period of time, but you have to have some continuity, right? So we have people that are part of our practice that are dedicated to research, that they're professionals. This is their career. This is not a stepping stone to something else. This is what they do, and this is what they're trained to do. And they mentor in terms of like how to navigate the regulatory apparatus, in terms of, how to not get our institution in trouble, HIPAA violations, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to have those professional, dedicated people not changing over all the time. So we have those people at our institution. They just supervise an army of people that are coming in on a 1 year basis. But you have to have the Libbies like Hot Sass. You have to have the people that are like, this is my thing. This is not just a 1 year gig. This is what I'm passionate about, and I'm going to do this for my career. So that is absolutely critical because I mean, frankly, you won't get stuff done. You also get in trouble. I mean, you'll be, ordering tests and billing insurance when it should have come from a research grant. I mean, that'll get you in big trouble with insurance, with government insurance payers. I mean, there's some liability issues that if you're fast and loose with PHI or that kind of thing, I mean, it can get serious. So you have to have a professional core of researchers on your team, period.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Albert?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we have a core group of research coordinators who essentially have been with us for a long time, and I think those are the people who can oversee sort of some turnover, because you can't reinvent trying to get IRBs all the time. You know, how to even get a grant through. Those type of things are really necessary. And you know, obviously, sort of the enthusiasm of the people coming through who are more transitory in nature. Um, the enthusiasm can be squashed really quickly if there is not a person that they can direct sort of their questions regarding sort of the, you know, nitty gritty of the things that we don't like about research. And so I think there has to be sort of a glue that stays there. You know, and I think all of us probably have that in common, you know, in our research teams.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things. One is that I agree with you with regards to having a clinical research coordinator or several, but there's even turnover in that position, and you'll see it. And so that can actually, if you don't have a backup for that situation, that can destroy a team. And I think that there are ways to avoid that are you continuously have a manifest. And so I would strongly advise any research team that their CRCs or whatever, there is a written manifest with regards to how every project goes. And so that there is, it's like, you know, we think of it scientifically. It's like, you know, how we publish a paper is that we publish it so someone else can actually reproduce the results. That's the whole goal of writing a scientific paper. And if your methods aren't reproducible by someone else, then we really should probably be not accepting that as a valid research. To me, that should extend all the way down to your team. So every project should have a manifest of this is where the data is located. This is how the data is collected. These are where all the applications are, so that then it's that could then be transferred to whomever, that you're not recreating a wheel, even if your core staff is at risk of being lost. So that's the first thing. Second is that core staff, like I had mentioned, there should be some higher level research admin leadership within the department that can act as a buffer, because again, you're going to see those people, hopefully not, but it could be 2 years, it could be 4 years, it could be 5 years, but there's going to be turnover in that system. And the people that are going to help to be able to kind of wade through that are the people that are career within the department, that have 15, 20-year careers, that are the clinical research coordinator, you know, the manager of those people, that then can manage the grants, can manage at a high level, can go into another grant, or another team to be able to help out. The third thing is flexibility within teams of skill sets, so that, like Grant is within Rush, there's a joint team, and that joint team has certain skill sets that likely overlap with the teams that are in the shoulder or sports team. And it might be a red person that has experience with REDCap. It might be a person that has a lot of experience with funding, either pre or post award. It might be a person that has a lot of experience with IRBs, or whatever the situation is, industry sponsored contracts. And that there should be some, I think, training, crosstalk between those people in the stages when the research is going well, so that if someone leaves, then that person can come in and actually offload the team without all of a sudden, okay, we've got an industry sponsored project, we lost our person. All right, we're done for 6 months until we find another person to be able to actually restart that. The last thing is money. And so that I think besides people, the resource that kills a team in terms of your organism is loss of money. And so there has to be some sustainable funding source. And that could be us as surgeons, like directly out of our bank account, hopefully not, but maybe. But to find a long-term solution for a funding resource that isn't going to go away. You know, I think perfect example down and, you know, where you are, Peter, is the institute that Mark has been able to create. There's resources of funding that are almost in, you know, in continuity, that continual, that you don't have to completely, there's a way to be able to kind of help with times that are low. And for me, I can tell you, for me, I'm lucky that I've got a chair account. So I mean, I've been able to get a chair, and for my research team, that if our funding levels go low, I can dig into the chair account to be able to offset that, to be able to keep our projects going. But I think in the long term, if you're going to have a team that's really working at a high level, I think thinking outside the box of, okay, I gotta just get grants. I gotta it's like, we're hopping stone to stone type of thing, that you can't do that, because there are going to be periods where there's nothing, or you need something, and you can't always rely on, like, go to the chair and ask them for money or whatever to be able to do it. Thinking about having some long-standing resource, and honestly, you can think out of the box. What do I think is, could you even invest? And like, can you put things, if you got a resource of money, and could you put that into some relative interest-bearing kind of resource that then starts to peel off money, that then you've got a way to be able to actually get $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, because you've got some interest-bearing account that you can then actually go to when times are low. Those are the types of things that at least our team thinks about how to maintain the well, so that it doesn't go completely dry. Any other thoughts? Okay, guys, this was great. I really appreciate your time. We're about 15 minutes over, but a lot of great conversation. This was exactly what I was hoping for with getting everyone together. So again, I appreciate everyone's time and effort, and away from work and family, and look forward to seeing you guys hopefully in a month or so at the annual meeting. And then otherwise, Steve, I think we can. Do we have an outro by Smith and Nephew, or no?
No, there's no outro. No, just the
Okay.
intro ad.
Okay, no problem. Well, again, Smith and Nephew's been kind enough to be able to sponsor all of our research webinars this year. We hope that they'll continue their support for what we're doing next year. This honestly is going to be my last show. So guys, thank you again. I'm kind of transitioning off the research committee this year. I've had 6 years on the committee, so I've kind of extended it as long as I can, that I was a member, and then went to co-chair with Ty, and now a couple of years with Peter. And so I've kind of extended my welcome, I guess, beyond what is reasonable. So again, thanks for being part of this, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Great job, Bob. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Bob. Thanks, guys.
Good to see you guys.
You're right, Bob. Thanks.